get a pen. Here's the number. Studio A is 712-432-6958, and Studio B is 716-748-0112. Thank you very much for listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the number one listener-supported radio station in the world.
Rebecca Jernigan, your tour guide into discoveries, coming to you live from the heart of America to around the globe via the World Wide Web, satellite, and podcast. Let's journey together into the realms of the known to the unknown in search of enlightenment, knowledge, and truth. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet Earth. This is your host, Rebecca Jernigan, and you're listening to Journeys with Rebecca right here on wolfspiritradio.com and also simulcast on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, Studio B. Please remember that both stations, Wolf Spirit Radio and Freedom Slips, are totally listener supported. So any donations really make a difference. It allows for all the wonderful show hosts and their guests to continue to provide the best and latest information. And of course, it really is not mainstream. Now, don't forget to go to the website. That's journeyswithrebecca.com and check out the archives, upcoming guests, along with their topics, any workshops or classes that are being offered at this time, as well as setting an appointment for your session with me. And as always, there's a free newsletter for you to sign up. And the Twitter is working, and soon my YouTube page. So if you want to subscribe to it, it will be having a whole bunch of new content going up on my YouTube page. So look for all of that information there at journeyswithrebecca.com. So let's get right to it. Tonight's guest, his name is Patrick Paul Garlinger. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. We'll get to him in just a second. He's the author, Seeds of Light, Channeled Transmissions on the Christ Consciousness. Everyone is equally divine, equally capable of accessing a state of consciousness that sees a world of infinite possibilities and unconditional love. This is the grounding tenet of this transformative new work by Patrick. If we consider religion's idea of the Christ as a state of consciousness available to everyone, rather than a figure to be worshipped, Seeds of Light offers a new pathway to enlightenment. Patrick provides a detailed understanding on how the mind typically works and how this prevents us from accessing the truth of who we are, aspects of God's, or seeds of light. Our minds create the illusion that this world is made up of objects separate from us in time and space, an illusion that often feels threatening. We do not fully grasp our own power as aspects of God to create that world. With Seeds of Light, Patrick weaves together the profound life-altering insights to elevate humanity's consciousness and revolutionize our beliefs about what it means to be human. We're going to get a really great conversation tonight, but please remember, if you have any questions for my guest tonight, in all caps, type it into the chat boxes, and you can get into those chat rooms at either Wolf Spirit Radio or at freedomslips.com, Studio B, and we will get those questions answered for you on air tonight. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce my guest tonight, Mr. Patrick, is it Garlinger? Or
it is Garlinger.
Oh, yay!
You were right.
I meant to ask you that when I touched base with you earlier today, and I thought, ooh, okay, well, maybe I should have asked because that was one of the questions that was on my mind. Anyway, welcome to the show, Patrick.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm so delighted to be here. And I should tell you that you are hardly alone in not knowing how my last name is pronounced. It's a very rare name. It's a German name, and many people want to say Garlinger naturally, but it's
Well,
Garlinger.
yeah, I kind of felt like it was Garlinger. I was like, I think that's it, but it could be pronounced Garlinger. I don't think so, but it could be. There's another option. So anyway, we're glad we got that misconception cleared up. So let's talk a little bit about your book. As a matter of fact, you had a book before this that I really wasn't aware of. And you can mention that here in just a minute. But, Seeds of Light, channel transmissions on the Christ consciousness. As I told you, I got all but one chapter read of the book. And I have had a lot of people on the show in the 15 years that I've been doing radio. And this one is, I think people might think of it as really rainbows and unicorns and a lot of fluff. It's not even close. It's not even close. That's what I enjoyed about it. I have to tell you, I really enjoyed the premise behind this entire book. It's unique to say the least. So let's start out with getting to know you a little bit and the audience to get to know you. I know that you are an attorney and you're working part-time. Is that still true?
It is. I'm actually, for just a short stint, working a little bit more than part-time. I'm actually working full-time again, just for a brief stint, but I do continue to work as a lawyer, which is something I quite enjoy. And for a lot of people, that's kind of a strange combination. But I can talk about more why I continue to do what I do.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear it because I thought, well, that's an interesting profession, but we have to have, our light beings, I guess, in all walks of life, but I would like to hear, your particular reason why you continue to do that. That's interesting.
Well, part of it is, intellectually I do enjoy it. But honestly, part of it is that, I regard being an attorney as a healing profession. And because when people come to you for those sorts of issues, really they're at a moment of crisis. People don't go to see lawyers because it's fun.
No, right? No, we don't.
Nobody is like,
I
think I'll just hire an attorney because it'll be fun to sort of spend a lot of money in a legal battle.
There you go.
And so for a lot of people, it's very much a moment of very, in some instances their liberty is at stake. In others, their livelihood is at stake. And so, for most people, their image of being a lawyer is that you are, sort of antagonistic and you're fighting and what. And obviously there is somebody on the other side. But I regard it in terms of my relationship with what is happening as a healing practice, that ultimately what you're dealing with is a dispute and a breakdown of all the possible mechanisms of resolving some conflict between two people or the government and a person, et cetera. And this is the mechanism that our society has set up to resolve that as sort of like the final recourse. And so if I can operate in that vein in a way that isn't necessarily being expressly, spiritual or in any way sort of bringing energy in a kind of deliberate or, open way. It's not like I say to people, well, let's bring some light into this. But I know that I'm bringing a certain vibe and consciousness to the work that I'm doing. So,
sure.
I've just continued to do it. It shows up. It asks me to do it. And so I don't turn away because, I regard, lawyering as somehow, low vibrational or something like that. I think that that's something that people can sometimes say as well, shouldn't you have moved on? When God is ready for me to move on, I'll move on. And for right now, I'm doing it, along with all of this other work.
Well, and that's absolutely fantastic. Really, truly it is. And I could tell you from my own personal experiences, I've only had to hire attorneys a couple of times in my life. And every one of those attorneys that I hired they were really gentle souls. They were lovely people. It wasn't like you see on TV where everybody's, screaming and hollering and, horridness that's going on. It was never like that. They were just really nice people. So I think I'm going to put you in that category as well, Patrick.
I hope so. maybe I'll start yelling later, just as.
No, yeah. Make some people feel comfortable, right? Okay. So you started, all right, let's next go to, how did you get into this channeled information? How did that transpire based on where you've come from as a profession? And certainly people are not their professions, not always. And so they have their downtime or their own time. So obviously something transpired with you that, allowed you to be able to perceive in a much deeper, more consciously aware, way.
Yes, absolutely. If you'll indulge me a little story here, my beginning, it goes back a number of years where I was, frankly not at all in touch with, any kind of spiritual teaching. I had started to meditate, and was sort of intrigued by Buddhism. But
Yeah.
all of a sudden the world opened up for me, when, out of nowhere, a ton of kind of divine mother figures, Amma, being the principal one, who is, sort of known as the hugging saint, and the person who became my teacher kind of began to show up in my life. And what had happened is just that people in my life who I would meet would start telling me, "Oh, you should go see so and so," or "Have you ever seen?" And suddenly, like literally, the universe just opened up for me. And what happened is I met my teacher, who is Mirabai Devi, and her gift is the ability to transmit light into somebody. And it was the first experience I had where I had no expectation of what was going to happen, but I said, I'm going to try this. I was sort of open to this kind of experimenting, and she did a light transmission, which for those listening who don't really know what that is, you might think of it as like a form of remote Reiki. But it blew me away. It like I literally was like on the floor filled with the most blissful light I'd ever experienced in my life. And the only words that could come to mind were, God exists. Like there was just a breakthrough there. And I worked with Mirabai and continue to work with her, but I apprenticed with her for years. And through that, we would regularly, I was basically learning to hold more and more light in my body, and all sorts of things were happening on an emotional and physical level. Old issues were sort of coming up and then disappearing. And I had a number of just experiences along the way. The first is that in 2013, I actually literally began to see particles of light. And it was sort of the most astonishing sort of moment in all of this, because, things had been changing physically and emotionally for me, but I hadn't really had an experience that really would speak to, other than feeling this energy in my body, which itself was quite amazing. But I literally was staring at the floor, and all of a sudden I saw these little streaks of light, and the first thought that came to mind was, oh, it's raining. And then I realized, wait, I'm staring at the floor. these little drops of this, it's like a split second. I'm like, wait a minute. And I was like, wait, is that there again? And so I looked, and it was everywhere. Just all these drops of light. Of course I had my eyes checked. I was like, wait, is something going on? And that was the real beginning for me. And as I continued to work with Mirabai, I began to be able to sort of hold more and more light, and I was learning to do healing work with other people. It all really began after about 3 years. I actually had a massive Kundalini awakening that if people aren't familiar, Kundalini is the energy that's traditionally regarded as being at the base of your spine. And for 3 days I was having this incredible back pain and this heat at the bottom of my spine. And I thought, oh, I just need to stretch. And I kept stretching and it wasn't going away. And I was taking, ibuprofen, and then all of a sudden it happened. And this energy just like lava just moved up and down through the chakras. And I was incapacitated really for a couple months. Just this energy moving up and down, several times throughout the day. And it was during that time that all of a sudden I heard this voice that clearly said to me, we're going to write, and we're going to write quickly. And that's when it began. That's when the channeling, it was totally unexpected. I was sort of a reluctant channel. I mean,
Understand.
And part of me is like, wait, where is this coming from? Well, this wasn't really the plan. It's interesting how when we go through different phases, or at least as I went through different phases, there were certain things I could accept. And then there would be another moment of like, well, wait a minute, that's a little too far out there. And I can handle light. I can see light, but I don't want to channel. And that's really where it began. And it happened very quickly. I in the space of 6 months, downloaded 3 books, which Seeds of Light is the first one. And the other 2 are in the pipeline. So that's the story.
Well, and I'm sorry I misspoke that because I thought you'd already written one. I think I was on Amazon.com. And I thought it said in there, and see, so maybe I was looking at something in the future, I don't know, but it had a whole different name to it, and I thought it said that was your first book, so my mistake.
Rebecca, you were absolutely right. I'm sorry to cut you off, but you're absolutely right, and my apologies. I had actually I have written a book called When Thought Turns to Light, and it describes, sort of my experiences with Mirabai and with Amma, and provides a lot of tools around meditation and mantra, spiritual practices. But that one was, for lack of a better, normal, not channeled. It was traditionally written. And it's one of the things that's quite striking is, when I compare them, the tone and the structure are just completely different in that my own writing, and all that sort of within quotation marks, my writing is, I try to be elegant and very simple, and I try to, make it very accessible and all very logical, sort of linear. And then Seeds of Light was just like, all over the place.
It's nonlinear.
It's so not linear.
Yeah.
But in a way very, as I look back at it, I was like, the architecture and the way it flows, I find, to be quite compelling. But, I sort of say to myself, I could never have come up with this. I would never have written this. It would have taken me years. It took me years to write the other book. So.
Right. Well, so let's talk a little bit about this. When I say who, everyone has a source of which the channeled information comes from. Is this coming from a higher realm, an angelic realm, from the Christ consciousness itself? Can you explain that before we actually get into kind of the nuts and bolts of the messages contained inside the covers?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, it's a great question because when it started happening, they very quickly just identified themselves as a collective, and they would speak in the we. And they said, we're the Council of Light, and we're, a group of souls that are here to sort of oversee humanity's evolution. And I don't think that means that they're the only, light beings or, sources of higher consciousness that are speaking to people and, being channeled today. I mean, there are definitely other, channels whose guides are either archangels or sort of in here I'm thinking of somebody like Paul Selig who just describes his guides as being guides. They don't seem to identify themselves. I didn't get much more of an answer beyond that, but I went and consulted with somebody who's sort of been a longtime advisor, who's sort of overseen witnessed my evolution. There's a really well-known intuitive named Tony Leroy, who I greatly admire. It was one of the first people who kind of came into my life when this transformation was beginning. And he, right away said, "This is amazing. It turns out you're really in contact with your higher self, and your higher self is part of this collective of souls." And that's all I needed that's basically all the information he had and all the information that I need to know. Beyond that, there's no identification of any specific voices. Like nobody's telling me that, Jesus is among them or any particular, archangels or anything. And so beyond that, I only have a kind of trust in this higher wisdom. And that it continually speaks in a voice of we as a collective.
Yeah, understand that. And that seems to be across the board, because when I step into that space, it's always a we.
Exactly.
We say, we think, we do, whatever. It's we, here's what we would like to share with you.
Exactly. And I think
go, okay,
Abraham does the same, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all good. It's all good.
I'm like, okay, so it's a we. Great. Let's talk.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And when they first started, I loved it. When they first started with me, they were all just talking at once. I call it a collective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were and then so I had to teach them that, I'm the human here. One voice at a time was all I could handle. Please, I cannot carry on 25 conversations at once. It was kind of fun. Anyway, let's get back into your book, because this is really good. So let's talk let's start with, I think in some of your write-ups that I've read across the internet is that we think in linear terms and binary. We see everything in binary code. And that gets into the nature of what, the reality, so to speak, in one of your first chapters there, of the reality and consciousness. What is the nature of that? Our reality.
Right. Yeah, we tend to look at the world, in the axes of time and space, right? We're always orienting ourselves, vis-a-vis, other objects, in space, where we are in relationship to everything else that we're sort of encountering, from moment to moment. And, this seems sort of so basic that we almost don't even examine it. That right now at this moment, I'm sitting in a chair and you, Rebecca, are, so many miles away in Kansas City, and, and the next second, the chair's still here, I'm still here, you're still there, we're both still speaking. And so our understanding of who we are is, sort of charting this moment from one object to the next. And of course, we think all of these objects are separate from us. And in a way they are. We're certainly experiencing it. I'm not the chair, and I'm not, this object, I'm not the walls. And of course, I'm not you and you're not me. We are separate. We have a certain autonomy. And that's the way the mind works, and it's consistently looking at the world in this way. And the part of the problem with that, is that, what that means is that, my existence, I exist because I can establish that I am separate from you and separate from everything else, and continue to be separate from one second to the next, in time. And
Patrick,
most of us don't pause to examine that. Like, well, that's, of course, that's who we are.
I'm not able to hear you. I don't know if. Okay.
Oh,
Patrick.
no.
Patrick, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
I lost you there I lost you for a few moments. So
Oh, no.
you kind of left, we had like a little glitch in the program here. And it happens, right? It's energy. So if you'll go back to the point where we have a tendency to view ourselves as separate from the objects that we are, and then there was a point there where you started breaking up a little bit, and then I couldn't hear you at all.
Oh, okay.
Are you talking now? Because if you are, I can't hear you
sorry
again.
about that, but yeah. Can you hear me again?
Hello?
Can you still hear me? Hello, Rebecca?
Is anyone
Can you
able
hear
to
me?
hear me?
Yeah, I can
you
hear
now.
everybody. Hang on, we got a bit of a network glitch here. Hang on. Okay, is everybody in real time now?
I can
Yes.
hear you. Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Tobias?
Can you hear each other?
Yes, I'm here, clear. I can hear you
Okay.
all.
Okay, great. Okay, I think we're smooth for a moment.
I'm paying attention. It looks like everything's okay in terms of,
It
my
does.
connection, but, clearly, maybe, who knows?
Yeah, who knows? These things
Who knows?
happens.
These things. So, so we look at ourselves as being separate from all these objects. And the key is that, in some ways our sense of that we exist is dependent upon that separation. I am me and I am not all of these other things and all of these other people. But what that means is, it's two things. The first is that any other object can disappear and I will continue to exist, right? So, people leave our lives, we lose objects, things disappear, and, those, you don't say to yourself, I've just lost a piece of myself. But the corollary is true, which is that our own existence then means that we can be removed. So, if we were to cease to exist, the rest of the world would continue because everybody else's existence exists because they're separate from us. So this is how we operate in time and space. And, what that means is everything that we look at is potentially, this is one of the main points that they stress, is potentially a threat to us. So our minds are continually evaluating how much our existence is supported or not supported by how we relate to everything that's happening around us physically. And so that's the first kind of big premise of the book.
Okay. And I have a statement that I hope I can remember. I'm going to write it down here because I know you're going to get into this information a little bit later, but I have a direct question that will be related to further down, I think, in our talk tonight. And that's an interesting viewpoint, for sure. I mean, that was what I'm saying about the book. The book isn't like rainbows and unicorns. It's like dealing with like beyond the quantum in a sense. But yet it brings it down into terms that you can understand. And it's very thought provoking. Just those statements right there that you made, is very thought provoking. Because you think, okay, so this is how we've always looked at it. So let's have you continue along those lines and get more into depth with how that kind of flows from there.
Right. Well, one of the things, two things happen, and there are two things I want to kind of mention. One is what it's the moments that we have when we're not in that kind of, when we're not really focused on time and space. And so I want to talk about that. And then what flows from the fact that this is the way we are typically. And the first is, we've all, I hope everyone has had experiences where, you've maybe been, either playing a sport and you're like in the zone, or, you're in nature and you have, maybe it's just like some majestic scene and you're just there and you're kind of for a moment, right? It feels like you're not even separate from the world, or you're playing this sport and everything's flowing and you're not even trying, you're not even thinking about what you're doing.
it's there. Maybe sometimes runners have it. They get into the zone. It's moments when your mind stops really analyzing the world around you. And anybody who's had one of those experiences will step back, and it always happens very frequently, but you'll suddenly pull out of that and be like, wow, that was amazing. Like for a split second, I was like one with this scene. I was just completely part of this beautiful scene in nature or something. And that is like a taste of what enlightenment is like. That's a taste of what it's like when our minds aren't constantly orienting ourselves in time and space.
So that's actually, quite fascinating. I want to share a little story here with you. This is one of my bigger, I guess you could call it bigger moments of what you termed as enlightenment. There was an extreme electrical storm.
Yeah.
One evening. I mean, just extreme. Wind was just howling and blowing and lightning everywhere and thunder and rain. And it was just, it was like I was compelled to get up and watch this storm. I had no emotions. I had no thoughts. I had nothing. I was just like, first I observed the electrical part of it, where the lightning come down. And I was watching that lightning and I was feeling that lightning. And then I went from the lightning to the rain. And then I watched the rain come down. As the rain come down, it hit the grass. And then as it hit the grass, I looked at the grass and I went down, and the grass, grows roots, and how the roots were all connected. Now they were all talking to each other. I had this one weird thought that came in, and I thought, oh my gosh, this wind and rain is going to crush this grass.
Mm.
And the grass literally kind of projected to me this root system that makes them stronger because they're all connected. And that led to all the trees and everything. I mean, it just, it could have went on into infinity. And then I was directed to the wind. As the wind was coming through, it was actually a song on that wind. It was just the most unusual. And to this day, I still think about that electrical storm, and I think about, and that probably lasted, I'll tell you, probably a good 45 minutes. I was just in that space,
Wow.
traveling around, and I have no idea what, there certainly wasn't a thought to it, but when it was all over with, I was just like, wow.
Right.
What a trip.
So can I ask you, because that's such a beautiful story. I loved it. I loved hearing about all this traveling that you were doing. Were you able to think while you were on the travel, or were you just on the journey and it was afterwards that you were able to sort of
during it, I was able to, like, when I connected with the grass was of concern to me for some reason, because it was being pelted with this rain, this torrential rain and the winds and,
right.
And that's when I asked that question, because I was still in observation mode, but I was curious, how are you going to withstand this beating of the water and the wind, upon you?
Right.
We think great blades of grass is not very strong. Well, you can walk down any sidewalk and, anytime a little blade of grass can break through concrete, there's nothing weak about that.
That's true. That's exactly
But it showed me all of this interconnectedness with the trees and the leaves. And I mean, I just traveled a lot in that space, just in my close environment. I call it my little local universe, whatever's in your backyard, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing. It was just an amazing experience.
That is fascinating. Well, and it probably speaks to your, where you are and what you have experienced in your life and are capable. You're somebody who obviously you have your own experience with channeling, who can experience. I think, most people who aren't, as knowledgeable and haven't had those experiences, these kinds of enlightenments, as they were, are, the mind is capable of pulling them out very quickly.
Sure,
so
I've had that happen too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I see it a lot with, people will have this moment when they're, staring at their like their child, and they'll be lost, just kind of absorbed in that love. Or, somebody will be staring at a lake and it'll be very serene. But the mind is very quick to pull us out of that. And then, evaluate the experience that we just had, right? We're like, oh, that's so cool. Oh, look at that. That was amazing. Oh, why can't I always have that? We can't seem to sustain it. And that leads to the next thing is that as we're always orienting ourselves in time and space,
have they given you information as to
part of
why
it
we can't sustain it? Is it just
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, we lost you again.
Why we can't sustain it, Rebecca? Yeah, you asked a question about why we can't sustain it.
Rebecca, can you hear us?
Okay, so I've lost Patrick again.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, God. Rebecca?
Is that Jay?
Yeah, this is JP, your friendly producer.
I can hear you perfectly.
Yeah. Yes. Right, okay. All I need to do, there we go. Yeah, we've still got the studio. Let me just go and bring Rebecca back in.
Okay.
And, checking what's going on here. You're listening to Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com, simulcast with Wolf Spirit Radio and Ever Beyond Radio. While we're waiting.
Hello.
Rebecca, you're back.
I'm back. I have no idea what happened. I was talking. No one was answering. Patrick, are you there?
I am here, and I heard your question. Hear me.
Okay.
Yeah, you asked a really key question, which is, why can't we sustain that? Why aren't we always in that state of, bliss, or unity with everything that we're experiencing? And part of it is that's how our minds are built. Our minds experience that actually, that loss of sense of time and space is actually, almost a form of death for the ego. I mean, that's really because it can no longer distinguish itself from, everything that's happening. So the mind very quickly will reorient us to, everything in time and space. And, but the ability to have those experiences and work on that's part of what the book is about. But to understand why we can't sustain it, we have to understand the next step that our minds are constantly doing is that, not only are we distinguishing ourselves in time and space, but we're constantly evaluating everything as being good or bad or supportive or not, or as a threat or not. And I think if anybody really begins to watch their thoughts, whether through mindfulness practice of meditation, you realize that you're constantly kind of evaluating, are you safe and secure? I'm okay. And you're evaluating everything that's experiencing in terms of good or bad, implicitly or often explicitly. And so that's the leap that our minds make, in terms of assuring ourselves that everything that we're experiencing in time and space is not going to harm us.
Okay, so my question to you would be this, is because we're very structured in the idea, maybe that's a key word there. We're very structured in the idea of, the four walls, the chair, as you said, the objects. We live in a house, we drive cars. Some people use horse and buggy still, whatever, right?
Right.
Some people use skateboards, I don't know, whatever. But the point being is that if we were always in that blissful state, then this world does not exist in that manner anymore.
That's right. And you are wondering, well, why don't we live in that world that doesn't exist? Or what would it mean what would it mean for our world if we were in that state all the time?
And Yeah, that's some of the questions, by the way, that I've actually had asked of me to ask you.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is to recognize that, that state of, bliss is in some ways that's what we understand to be kind of heaven, where you become kind of pure awareness, where essentially there is no separation between you and the rest of the world, or the universe at all. And I think science is catching up to us in this. There's, definitely work being done on like whether the universe is actually a hologram, and it really is, a sort of reflection of, or an illusion in the way that we currently experiencing it. But I would
agree with
say,
that.
yeah, I think it is. But we all agree, right? We all experience the world in terms of time and space. And part of that is learning to experience time and space, to live in this world without all of the judgment, without all of the differentiation, to be in time and space and at the same time relate to it as if you were living in
The state
the
of bliss.
the state of bliss. Exactly. The state of bliss is almost, it can almost be a distraction, right? Because then you start chasing that. You're like, oh, I just want to live in the state of bliss.
Yeah.
And
Can be
that
an
happens.
addiction.
It's an addiction. Exactly. That's so right. And people, they're like, I just want to experience the bliss until you begin to realize, and what eventually, I think ultimately the path is to relate to everything that you're experiencing, even in time and space, as that bliss. When you've undone all of the judgment and the preconceptions, because the bliss that you're experiencing when there is both heavenly, and it is, in a sense, a form of death, in the sense that it's the death of the ego that's constantly trying to orient itself in time and space and say, I am here and I'm not you. And that's why that's why the ego pulls you out of that. You can only stay in it for so long.
Right.
But the secret would be to relate to everything in time and space, without any judgment whatsoever, as if this were the bliss, because it really is. So it's like a preview. It's like a little peek into what's really going on, but we're not meant to really inhabit that. We're meant to work with our ego so that we end up relating to it. And that's what the Christ consciousness is. It's that relationship to time and space that undoes all of the judgment, all of the evaluation, that's really rooted in a sense that our existence could anyway really be threatened.
Right. So, okay, so here's a question for you as well. This one is from me. When my feeling is that this information that you're sharing with us, and you were talking about science earlier, how
Yes.
science is kind of catching up with us in various aspects, including what you were speaking of, which is about the kind of holographic kind of universe here, multiverse, whatever you wish to call it. But
Yeah.
in being that said, is that there's a lot of people getting, I call this the higher mindedness information. And more people are getting it. We're understanding that we're separate, but we're all connected. We have a separateness to us that identifies us, our identifier, which my name is my name and your name is your name, and there could be 1,000 of my name people with my name, but they're not going to be me.
Exactly.
There's a separateness there, but understanding that we're still all connected. We're connected to everything. So, are you feeling that this is I kind of get this idea that this is kind of like like somebody getting ready to turn over the coin to the other side. All of this prep work that we've been getting for the last 30, 40 years on this planet, this kind of higher mindedness information, and it's continuing and it's getting more and more evolved, that it's like a precursor to a evolutionary state. These things just don't pop in. It's not just like one day you wake up and the whole world's changed. Everybody in it, not just your viewpoint. It's a process. It's kind of like a wave.
Exactly. I could not agree with you more. And there's so many layers to what you just said, that I kind of want to,
Sure.
peel back, because the first is that you've hit the nail on the head when you're saying that, what we're really dealing with is this kind of duality of separation and being separate and not separate. So we're not meant to replace, say that everything that we're experiencing is an illusion that we then discard, right? Because, we all are continuing to exist as sort of separate, autonomous people who at the same time are completely connected to everything else.
Right.
And I think part of the real shift is, and for me, this is one of the kind of key pieces of any spiritual, perspective, is that it's always about holding what seem to be mutually competing or mutually exclusive, points of view together at the same time. And science does this. Science says, there's no time and everything's happening, in time and space. There are ways in which, science is grappling with the fact that, certain things seem to be both particles and waves. How can that be? And similarly for us, like, we are separate and we're not separate. And, what's happening is that as this wisdom continues to sort of percolate and permeate, more and more people are waking up to that. And the questions start to become, how do we live that way, with this knowledge? What am I supposed to do with it? How do I relate to other people? And then how is we as a collective, what are we supposed to do with that? And I think, what's happening is that more and more of this information is coming in, and it's deepening, as you said. It's sort of getting more and more, nuanced, and it's evolving so that we can begin to, expand the ways in which we bring this information into our everyday lives. And that's, I'm actually kind of previewing what the next two books are, because, the next book is really about how we relate to other people. And then the third book is how we change society. The first book is really about unveiling how do we relate to ourselves, as, in terms of, typical consciousness, or what the book calls collective consciousness, and then, the Christ consciousness. And so, one of the key points is to realize that, we ourselves, and just in terms of relating to the self, we're essentially going through life replicating who we are from moment to moment, recreating ourselves in a version of the past as a means of maintaining our sense of coherence of who we are, even though none of us is who we were, a moment ago, or a week ago, or certainly, 10 years ago. But we still try to kind of maintain a sense of identity over time.
Yep, there I did. I muted it.
You told me, and I was waiting. I was like, Rebecca's muted.
And it's only segment 2.
Okay, so I'll repeat the question. Seems how nobody but my four walls here heard that. That last statement you made, would that be ego?
The last statement that I said about, would that be ego? I lost the thread.
Okay, so did I. I remembered the question. Okay, so we'll skip that. We'll come back to it. It'll either come back or it won't. Okay. So let's move on, because my next thing that I want to talk to you about, because I thought it was really fascinating, was the true nature of love. I think this is a topic that many people kind of get confused on. I mean, we have an idea of what love is, and people talk about unconditional love, but I can tell you that most people really don't practice, if you will. That's not the correct word. Most people don't own that unconditional love state of mind and being, for everything.
That's right. Yeah. I love this topic, and I love the information that came through. It's in a way it's challenging because, the ultimate message is that everything that you experience is love. The entire world that we experience is love. And the first response to that, of course, is how can you say that? We have a world filled with, violence and murder and all sorts of, inequality and abuse and torture. How do you claim it's love? So I can talk about that. That's like, the question, that's like the $1 million question that everyone jumps to. But, the first, the simpler way is that, we, when we talk about love, often we really don't, we tend to prioritize certain types of love. And one of the things that, my guides, the light beings that came through really emphasized is the ways in which we limit ourselves. They're really big on, how we're constantly, sort of narrowing our options, and taking away possibilities, so that we, there are only certain possibilities that we accept and know. And of course, the romantic vision of love as, the other person who's going to fulfill you and make you whole is kind of our most, common love story. I mean, it's half the movies that are made. It's half the songs that are made. They're all about finding the soulmate, and then of course, always losing love as well. And what that means is we sort of blind ourselves to all the other ways that the universe is sending us love constantly, because it's all love. From everything as simple as, all the physical things that you have in your life that support you, every piece of food that you eat, everything you drink, all of it's sustaining you, and it's a form of love. And then, you have all sorts of relationships in your life that are, varying levels of support, and sometimes we think of them as love and sometimes we don't. But the real message is that we are constantly in this state of evaluating everything that comes to us. So we don't see it as love. It always is attached with agendas, or, it's not quite right, or I don't quite like this enough. And so we just don't label it as love. We label it as anything but love. So that's kind of the big message that they wanted to convey about.
You also, and I was just kind of letting that kind of soak in for a minute. So the idea of love, and I understand what you said by that. We all do have varying degrees. I have a different love for my children than I would for a mate or a partner, or for my mother, father, or sister, or brother, whatever the case may be. They're all love, but what we're speaking of here is that even things that may not appear to us as positive, we term them as a negative experience, or whatever. We're judging them, is what you're saying, in some sense, and we don't always equate it with that it could be coming in on the energy of what we call love. It's my understanding that there's really just, we say we have all these emotions, but there's really just two basic. Either everything's born out of love, which is, your generosity, your kindness, your, all of those other things. And then there's fear, which is your hate and your, uh, insecurities, et cetera, and so forth, that there's just really the two basic emotions. And then there are like subdirectories, if you will, of those emotions. So, when you're generous with somebody, it's usually because you have a love of what it is that you're doing, whether it's to give something to somebody that needs it, or helping someone that needs help, or whatever the case may be, donating to a charity, whatever. It's born out of an absolute place of love.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, what I wanted to jump in and say is, I think one of the things that and you pointed this, you have a different emotional connection to, say, a child than to a mate or to a parent or a sibling. And you see them all as love. And it's true. And I think that,
why don't we hold it there? Well,
okay.
This is where we're going to take a short break, you guys. Do not go away. We'll be back right after these messages. You're listening to Journeys with Rebecca, so stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Journeys with Rebecca. Boy, what a night this has been, energetically speaking. Woohoo! Having fun now. I hope everyone is still with us. Patrick, are you still here?
I am here.
Okay. This has just been kind of a little off the wall kind of night, I think. It's just lovely. We were talking about love, and there's a few things that I would really like for you to get into tonight. I know you've got a couple things that you wanted to talk about, but I would love for you to address, from the information in your book about control, judgment, and then one of my favorite topics that you really wanted to talk about was forgiveness. That's been a huge message across the board, especially for me. I've been given a lot of information about what that is and what it isn't, and just would love for you to share all of that stuff with the audience. But let's have you finish up with the topic of love, and then we'll move on to any of those other topics that you would like, and of course, whatever you would like to share with the audience.
Yes. Thank you. So love. Yeah. So we were talking about the ways in which, everything's love. And you very astutely pointed out, unconditional love is really very, very elusive. It's difficult for people to love unconditionally. Everything's sort of attached with an agenda in some sort. And, what I think, is important is that the guides here, the counsel, when they're talking about love, they don't mean that we're all going to experience the exact same emotion with every person. So, obviously you're going to have a different relationship to, your child and the side of love that you're going to feel for a parent or, a romantic partner or, somebody else, or a close friend. It's not that those things can't vary in terms of how you feel. It's that, when we love unconditionally, we don't have these agendas attached, and we're not looking at the relationship in any way, as to how much it matters to us or whether it reinforces a sense of who we are and that we're a good person or that we're safe and we're secure. Security is a really fundamental issue. And in every relationship that's not based on unconditional love, that's really what's going on, is there's a kind of a hierarchy of relationships. This one's really important and this one's less important. And some people you're like, well, they're not that important to me. And it's not that you would need to feel the same love. They're not saying, you should feel like you do for your partner with the way you do with the rest of the world, but rather how you relate to the experience when that person is with you, when you're having a conversation with this person one-on-one, when you're relating to them, almost inevitably some part of us is sort of saying, well, this is okay, but it could be better, or this is serving a utilitarian purpose in my life, but, I could be having more fun with somebody else. There's some part of you that's sort of always evaluating it as to how good or bad it is for you. And that's where the conditions come in. What am I getting out of this? is, kind of the underlying question. Not that it all has to feel the same. And that flows right into the next topic that you asked about, which is control. Which is that we don't relate to everything that's happening to us as being exactly what is meant to happen right now. Now, we hear that as a kind of spiritual thing all the time, like what you're experiencing, it's exactly what's meant to be. And my guides are very clear. That's exactly right, because you are in complete resonance with everything that's happening in your life. And so when you try to control, you're trying to sort of, in some sense, control, time and space in a way that ensures your security. That's kind of at the end of the day, the crux of our main relationship in time and space is really guaranteeing our security in all of our relationships, and everything you're doing. And so we kind of try to bend time and space around us, set it up in a way, manipulate it in a way so that we feel safe. And what they're saying is you don't need to do that.
Okay, so here's a question for you then.
Yeah.
Because, that elicits, because, I ask these same questions. Oh my. And I'd like to hear your answers on them. Security and safety is an internal thing. I've never looked at it as an external thing. As an example, some people, let's say they've been in a bad relationship, they've gotten out of that relationship, and they judge, and there's the word judgment. They judge every other relationship based on this first one or this one that was the most traumatic, so they don't feel safe
You're
and
cutting
secure.
out,
And they'll
Rebecca.
tell you that. I don't feel secure with this person, or I don't feel secure. Really what they're saying is they're not secure with their own
Right.
decisions or choices. They're not in flow or in sync.
Yes, exactly.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, are you asking, well, you didn't ask a question. You kind of identified how somebody has an experience and then they sort of carry that experience because it's sort of, they've registered this internally to the next.
Yeah, and that's kind of a control. Not only do they use judgment in that, a judgment, but they also then use the control mechanism, which is they try to control their next relationship based on this other relationship.
That's exactly right. So really what's happened when they approach the next relationship is that they don't really see that relationship as it is in the present moment. They see that through the lens of the past that they've previously experienced. And in some ways, and I definitely don't want to suggest that, somebody who's experienced something traumatic, that they're at fault or that they're responsible or that they've brought it on themselves, because we're moving out of, I definitely don't want to be that would be sort of judgmental of them. It's to understand how these things come to occur, which is that, they had a traumatic experience that was based on one individual who misunderstood what it meant to be in relationship with another individual, who obviously had their own kind of karmic background. And the person who we're talking about got in that relationship with that person and had their own karmic background, and that led to this experience. And they obviously had some lesson to learn about the nature of who they are. And so they learned something about, in some ways, a very painful lesson. But then they carry that, right? We carry that to the next moment. And so, when you're in the next relationship, you're actually not in relationship with the person in front of you. You're in relationship with the person that you were in relationship before, projected onto this person. Or in some ways, because you're carrying around the energy of this trauma, you actually invite a version of that person back into your life. So what you're seeing in front of you is a version of the past.
So anytime anything like that shows up, it's an opportunity.
It is an opportunity. It's showing up in your life and it's saying, how do I relate to this as love? Because it's asking me to relinquish some part of me that is false, that is untrue. It's asking me to relinquish the past. Because I have the ability to do that. I have the ability. I am actually whole. I am complete and whole and worthy of everything that life has to offer. But I'm carrying around with me all sorts of thoughts and emotions and energy that I've carried often through lifetimes that say, I'm not worthy. I'm unlovable. People should ignore me, whatever it is. And there are a lot of sort of very basic core issues that we're all carrying around. And so it's an opportunity. It's an invitation for you to recognize the falsity, like that's a falsehood. And that your power of recreation, what the guides actually talk about is resurrection when they get into the whole, what the real meaning of the resurrection is, within the Christian tradition, is your ability to let go of that past and say, okay, I experienced that trauma. I don't have to experience that trauma again. I'm actually powerful enough. I am a divine being who is powerful enough and can rebirth myself in this moment.
Okay, so I'm having, so we've lost everybody again. Hello?
Oh yeah? Rebecca, are you here?
Yeah, everybody keeps going away. I look down and there's like all these little things. I'm like, okay, everybody's gone again. Wow, we've just got to straighten out this energy tonight.
I'm telling you, I don't know what's going on. Come on, guys. Why don't you step in and help out?
Yeah, really, that'd be lovely. That'd be lovely. Lovely. So yeah, it kind of throws us off when these things happen because we're on this little train of thought.
It would be lovely, but I find
maybe
that's
just
not
the way it was
usually the
supposed
case. I find things are usually more disrupted than anything.
Not usually the way it goes, right? Okay, so we have this whole thing about you mentioned a couple of words there. You mentioned karma. We've talked a little bit about control and judgment. And you used the term showing up, which I like that term a lot, when we show up. And we've talked about, relationships. I think the thing that I would like for maybe to expound on, and that I read in your book that I found was really interesting when it was taught, and you said this at the very beginning of the show or earlier in the show, where we're in a constant state of, every few seconds or whatever it was exactly that you wrote in the book, of creating ourselves, like recreating ourselves, every moment. And we actually use the past in order to do that. It's kind of like this mechanism, and it's what keeps our identity. And I was like, I thought about that concept a lot, Patrick, when I read that, and I was like, well, isn't that fascinating? And so I'm hoping at the end of the show, maybe you can kind of share with people what they can do to maybe recreate themselves in a forward motion instead of a backward or a past thing, in order to to get there. And I know you've got some things specifically that you wanted to talk about, and I think you can tie that in. But we did have a question, and we haven't gotten to this particular topic yet. So
yes.
If you want, I'm going to read the question to you. And if you want to hold off until you get to that point.
Rebecca?
Okay. So.
Oh, Rebecca, you cut out again. Just when you were about to read the question, I was so excited.
Yeah. It's like, okay. Oh, I don't know who's driving the boat here tonight, but, they're having a lot of fun at everyone's expense. So the question is how do you know when you have truly forgiven?
Oh, I love this question. So, I'm going to answer that. I'm not going to defer, but I do want to answer it. We should get into what forgiveness really is.
Yes, that's a big question.
And so, there's a lot of talk about forgiveness in different spiritual traditions. It's not a new topic by any stretch of the imagination. And I have to confess that when I was, we're at that point of the book and they sort of got to forgiveness, there was a part of me that was like, ugh, forgiveness. I mean, like, yeah, I have a whole chapter in my first book, When Thought Turns Light, on forgiveness. I love forgiveness, right? I think it's, an amazing, amazing thing. It's so important. But I was like, really? We're going to talk about forgiveness? I mean, don't you have something more to talk about?
It's really an interesting topic though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And so, I can tell you that from my first book, when I talked about forgiveness, I really talked about the fact that, forgiveness, and this is, something others have said is it really is a gift to yourself, because forgiveness is about relinquishing the kind of grievance or the anger or the hurt that you're carrying around. And when you forgive, you really are letting go of this sense of victimization or that you, holding on to this other person who, harmed you at some point. And I don't know of anybody who's not been, harmed and hurt emotionally by somebody else and has struggled with forgiveness. And for a lot of us, part of it is that we want recognition. We want an apology. We want somebody to atone and say, I'm sorry, what I did for you was wrong. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with apology personally. But my guides are, like, you don't need apology. And the reason we don't need apology is because, in some ways what we're still looking for is for somebody else to tell us that what we did was wrong and that we didn't deserve it. We're looking for the other person to convey to us that we're okay and that we're whole, and that whatever belief that we might have derived from the harm they did, that we're, not lovable or that we're not worthy, that we're still looking for them to supply the answer. And forgiveness is where you let that go, because you're saying that simply wasn't true. You did not harm me. Now, that was my understanding of forgiveness, and I still believe it's valid. But when I was channeling, the guides were very clear that what forgiveness is really a form of resurrection, which is that you are rewriting yourself in the present by relinquishing the past. And they really stress the power of those words, I forgive, as words of constitution. What they talk about constitution is, the way we're constantly sort of identifying ourselves and saying, I am this, I am that. And that's how we operate in time and space. It's how we maintain our sense of coherence as a self. To say I forgive are actually words of resurrection, where you sort of say, I forgive you, meaning I am whole in this moment. Whatever grievance, whatever harm you said you did to me, that's simply not, it doesn't exist in the present moment. It no longer exists. And that was sort of revolutionary for me to think of that as, something that's really rewriting the past in the present.
I really enjoy what you just said. No, I just really enjoy what you just said. That's that that tells a lot for a person. It gives a lot of, stuff for information.
Right.
But anyway, go forward.
Yeah. So, I love this question of like, how do you know when you've really forgiven? And, there are two ways I want to answer that. And the first is that, the book stresses that you don't really need to believe in the words, I forgive. That there's a real power in claiming that and just saying it. Now, I relate to that because I do a lot of, one of the practices that I most recommend to anybody that I work with, or just people that I know are forgiveness prayers. And the forgiveness prayers that, my teacher uses and somebody that she endorses are these prayers from, a very powerful healer named Howard Wills. Those prayers can be found on his website, which is www.howardwills.com. They're very powerful, but we have to sometimes repeat. We have to repeat because, I know, and I'm sure that Rebecca. I mean, we've all had experiences where we've somebody's really harmed us, and we're carrying around like a whole lot of emotional baggage about somebody. And we say, well, I forgive you, or, to ourselves or even to that person. And then what do we do? We realize, I'm still carrying around a lot of anger. I'm still carrying around all of this. Like we've said the magical incantation.
Well, sure, we work on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so, part of it is that, that energy is, we hold on to things. We have not learned, and that's part of the practice, and that's part of the evolution of really embracing what the book calls the Christ consciousness is the ability to rewrite the past in the present moment each time faster and faster, and sort of speed up our sense that our identity is something that is much more malleable. And so it takes practice. It takes practice learning to have the ego let go of these things, which is why I recommend the forgiveness prayers. But
it's a very good idea.
That you've forgiven. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. But to answer this question of how do you know when you're not carrying around that energy, and that you're not carrying around the energy because the belief that you had that was adopted or taken away from you, like you took a lesson when somebody did something to you, that belief is no longer there. And when that belief is no longer there, you realize this other person really had no power over you, in any way, like no emotional power. One of the examples I give is, when somebody insults somebody else, if somebody insults me, if I wince, if I feel kind of that stab, that emotional pain, it's because on some level I believe it. Some part of me says that's true. And I'm feeling that combination of shame and, and guilt and whatnot that comes up from somebody doing that. Whereas somebody says to me, and this is an example in the book, your blue hair is really unattractive. and I don't have blue hair. You're sort of like, okay, thanks so much. That's not really, I don't know what you're talking about, right? I don't know what you're talking about because I don't have blue hair. But somebody says to me, you're really stupid. And I like wince. It's because some part of me believes I'm stupid. Some part of me is replaying the message I've heard, how many times in my life, or even just telling myself when it seemed like I, didn't live up to expectations or something. So forgiveness, and this is where I think self-forgiveness is probably the most critical of all. is when you really, when you've really relinquished the underlying belief that's there. And that, I will say, is not a practice that happens immediately, even though the book talks about, resurrecting yourself with those words. So I'm going to pause there, Rebecca, because I feel like I've been rambling.
No rambling. You've been very clear and concise. Absolutely beautiful. Let's go ahead and take this next question. And then I know there's some topics that you want to share with the audience because they're important. Not that any of the rest of it isn't, but they're important for you to express. So the next question is, how can you release a trauma so you know it won't happen again?
That's such a great question. So, working with trauma is, and I'm just going to kind of step back a little bit because now we've gotten two questions on trauma. And I think those are the things that, come up most often because it's, that people are looking for, really profound healing there. I mean, trauma is something that, can sort of be very debilitating. Now, one of the first things, and this is, I don't think the book in any way tries to suggest that all trauma is going to be healed simply through the invocation of those words. And part of that has to do with the fact that, healing yourself is not something that is always capable of being done. I mean, we do need assistance. My own healing path has involved tremendous amounts of work with my teacher and with other divine figures. And part of that has to do with the nature of trauma, which is that the effects on the psyche is very, very powerful. Obviously, that's the very definition of trauma. But that the energy that is inflicted there and that you're carrying with you is very profound. So one of the things that people don't realize is that the emotional energy of trauma is something that you tend to replay again and again and again. And that repetition, is sort of building that energy more and more and more. And the book talks about the fact that everything that has energy is actually consciousness. It has its own consciousness. So the trauma is its own entity. It exists almost like a separate being from you. And it has to be extracted in some ways. It doesn't want to go away. It wants to persist as itself. And so when you've gone through life with this trauma where you've in some ways relived it again and again, it's very difficult to eradicate on your own. I think that's really important because there's really, when you're dealing with trauma, I find, and this is what I've experienced with people that I've worked with, is that, there's a level of sort of guilt and self-flagellation of like, why am I not better? And so it's important to sort of not beat yourself up.
Agreed.
With, the difficulty of trauma, you've got to be gentle with yourself, in that regard. But I do highly recommend, and it's the thing that I have found to be most effective for me personally are the forgiveness prayers, that I mentioned. And I found them to be very powerful in bringing in, assistance in a way that, the way the words I forgive are a claim to existence, a claim of saying I release the past. The forgiveness prayers are an invocation to something bigger than yourself, the divine, God, an archangel, to assist you in that. And in a way, you're claiming that assistance. You're claiming a connection to a power to work on that trauma. So I hope that's helped answer some of the question. Did I lose a piece of it there, Rebecca?
Nope, that's perfect. It's absolutely excellent. Absolutely excellent.
Good.
And so for the moment, that's all that we have for questions. So what I would like for you is you had said that there were some topics that you wanted to broach. So now would probably be a really good time for you to do that.
Great. Well, I think, the book, really stresses, something that's important, because I see this coming up again and again in different settings. Sometimes it's Facebook groups or just, other, online ventures, people really, really striving for, enlightenment or striving for certain experiences and expecting others to be, sort of get on the path, so to speak, and, feeling like, why won't the world wake up? Because there's a lot going on in the world, right? We're facing tremendous challenges in terms of climate change. We're essentially killing our planet. There's all sorts of, political upheaval, and people are saying, people need to wake up. And there are two messages in the book that I think are really important, which is that, your life at the end of the day, no matter what you do, your life is actually absolutely perfect just as it is. It's your judgment of where your life is that gets in the way. And what that means is that we tend to regard our life as sort of trivial, or we'll say, oh, if I'm not doing this, huge thing, my life is not meaningful. And in a way, there's just a sense of like, that I sort of don't belong here, and that I don't really have a purpose. And unless I find this big overarching purpose and fulfill it, that my life is meaningless. And they really stress that that's just not the case. That, some of us do have life missions that are related to waking up the planet. And others aren't, and that's okay. That's a form of judgment itself of other people's path, and our own lives. And on that second point, the other people's lives, we so often want people to wake up because if you've had a moment of spiritual awakening and you've seen how dramatically your life can change, you want others to experience it. Naturally you're like, well, listen, this is what's available to you. But not everyone is here to wake up in this lifetime. Some people come in and their life is to learn a simple lesson, like they're going to learn patience in the most basic meaning of patience, or they're right. Their whole life is like, I'm an impatient person. I'm an impatient person. And you're like, that's your life. Or their life is, resilience, and they have a hard life, and you're like, wow, this person, they just can't seem to get a break. And somebody else has an easy life. And you're like, but this person, they're just slogging through life. And their life is maybe about resilience. And it's not that you can't invite them. It's not that you can't share with them, but it's a form of control. It's another form of like trying to control the world about them to sort of, get them to wake up. And that's part of the path, is relating to everyone as the divine perfect being that they are, despite the fact that they can be the most, egotistical, brutish, insulting person. And it's not that you condone it. It's that you don't relate to them and say, well, this is a lower being, or they're not, they haven't progressed, or I'm so much more evolved than them. If they could only just get to where I'm at, the world would be a better place, right? Those are things that we say to ourselves. And it means that we've fallen out of a relationship of love to this person, that we're no longer in an unconditional love with them because we want them to be different than they are, rather than seeing them as perfectly divine. And that's, I
That's a
admit,
challenge.
it's a challenge. I'm not going to say to anyone other that I walk around in life, perfectly blissfully in love with everyone I'm counting. If I'm on the subway and people are pushing and jostling, it's a challenge, without a question. But at the same time, it's a learning. That's the opportunity. Every moment that you are experiencing that, where somebody is annoying you or upsetting you or whatnot, is the universe saying, you are in alignment. You are in agreement with this energy. It's showing up. You could not experience this if you weren't in agreement with it. It's part of your experience now. It's showing up. And it's how you relate to that. Most often we're saying, I don't want this. I want to push this away. Why can't this person just not be here? Why don't they leave? And there you've just reiterated the energy of judgment and separation. And so it's the constant, from moment to moment, of learning to be with that and realizing, and this has probably been one of the most fundamental shifts in my life, is realizing that when somebody does, is annoying you or doing something and you don't like it, our most common way of trying to get them to change is through words of persuasion, right? Or trying to convince them that they're wrong, or telling them that they're wrong. And sometimes that's necessary, in the sense that, there may be instances when you need to, use words and stop somebody. But most often we try to kind of push people into being different by using words, by using language, as opposed to relating to them in a way that conveys unconditional love, such that whatever is going on with them that's leading them to act in the manner that they are is no longer being invited to the table, so to speak. And that's a challenge too. But it means that in a way you're relating to them as the perfect being that they are, that they're not exhibiting at that moment in time and space, and inviting that person to show up, which is very different from saying, let me tell you why you're wrong and how you should be behaving. So, right? That's usually what we do in some way. Like, let me tell you what you're doing wrong, and this is how you should be.
I used to say inappropriate behavior.
Right. And so you're trying to bend the world to your will of how you think that they should be. And that's our normal way of doing things. And we all do it, even when we've progressed on the spiritual path for a long time. There's going to be somebody, we're going to be like, no, you need to do this. As opposed to recognizing that because we are all energy and we are all connected, the fact that this person is showing up in your life as annoying is because you're vibrating with annoyance. You have annoyance in you. It's part of you. You are, what my guides are constantly saying to me, you're in agreement with it. It's an agreement so that you both are sharing it. If you weren't in agreement with annoyance, it wouldn't show up. So, by the way, this person's mirroring you. There can be no other way. And so, that puts a lot of responsibility on somebody, because in some ways it almost sounds like you're to blame, but we're out of the realm of blame. We're not in the realm of blame. We're in the realm of resonance. And so,
right.
You then have to sort of look inside and say, well, what part of me is inviting annoyance to the table? And let me invite something else. And that to me is part of the message of seeing everyone as equally divine and equally valid no matter where they are on the path. Because that's where that's where the judgment slips back in. So that was kind of the final point I really wanted to drive home. Because I think for people who are on this path, it's kind of our blind spot.
You know, it is, and I have to relate a little story. I had 3 business calls I had to make this morning. And in 2 of the 3 calls, when you answer, of course, you get an automated system. Nobody just answers the phone anymore. It's just not happening, right? That just doesn't go on anymore. So, in 2 of the 3 calls, every one of them said, Monday is usually our highest call volume. Please note that your wait time may be longer than usual. And of course, you have to listen to the really, really, and I am making a judgment here because it does sound really awful music. It's really awful music. I didn't call to listen to that. But anyway, the first person I got on the phone, absolutely, I just was like, this is a Monday for this person. You know, that old adage, oh my gosh, it's Monday again. Everybody gets this, crap attitude because they haven't had enough weekend, whatever. So it was a young man that answered the phone, and, he was talking to me in this very monotone, very crisp tone. And I thought, okay, well, let's have some fun with this. So I did, being totally exuberant, really happy, wishing him the best day he could ever have. When I hung up the phone, I thought, now he'll remember my call today, and maybe, just maybe, for a little while today, that energy may have soaked in, and he may feel better. That was my wish for him, that he would just feel better, and then there's been times, and I have to tell you, I've made those same kinds of calls, and I'm just not a happy camper. I'm just pretty curt myself on the other end. So, you get out of this world what you put into it, right? But
yeah, exactly.
It was a lovely day, in as much as that I made everybody on the call at least snicker, if nothing else, on every call that I had today. So on all these businesses, and these are people that are just not in the business of being polite, mannerly, and chit-chatty, shall we say.
Yeah.
So spread the love, right?
Exactly. Spread the love. And you recognize in yourself of like, oh, okay, I'm feeling this. I'm feeling the judgment. I don't like the music. Then this call happens, right? And yet you were able to sort of say, okay, no, I'm aware of that, and I'm not going to fall into that. And you related to this person differently.
Yeah, and I hope
Beautiful.
I can do that. I hope I can do that all the time, because it doesn't always happen.
No, that's the thing, is that we fall back into these patterns. And, the other thing that, that they stress is that because most of us, 99% of us, are not going to be self-realized in this lifetime. We're not going to be self-realized in the sense of whatever image we have of being, kind of a Buddha or a Christ, where we're perfectly serene at all times, glowing blissfully, is that even us saying that we've fallen out is our own judgment. It's amazing how quickly we can sort of be like, well, I wasn't so good there. And there's a way in which there's a difference between sort of, noting, oh, I actually didn't act with love there. I was actually responding and understanding what happened to us, as opposed to, oh, that's a little bit, I'm not so good, or, I'm backsliding a little bit. I better redouble my meditation efforts. Right? It's not that you can't do that. It's not, you can't sort of recognize, oh, I'm falling back into a pattern. But we tend to, we evaluate ourselves in terms of this progress. And so we're constantly, falling off the path, so to speak. And my guides are like, no, stop judging yourself for that. every moment is a moment of like, that past moment is gone. When you're evaluating yourself against that past moment, it's not there. As long as you've derived the lesson, there's no reason to beat yourself up with the past. I want to relay a story to you.
Good. I mean, good. That's
because
okay.
Do we have time? I have a little story about what it's like to see one's life, because we've been talking about this in terms of, this is what the book lays out.
I think we have,
and
about
these things
maybe
are abstract,
10
but I wanted to relate an
minutes?
experience.
No, we don't have that long.
Oh, okay. Okay. This won't take that long. But I had an experience, that falls into the kind of category of experience I was describing to you at the beginning, like, sort of seeing light for the first time or having a Kundalini awakening. I was on the island of Kauai with my teacher, and we were doing a retreat, and we were doing a particular, in a session I had an experience where she was sort of doing, energy work on me. And I had an experience where, I started to see in kind of rapid succession, my life flashing before my eyes, sort of just like like just snippets of my life, just flashing rapidly. Sort of the kind of like, the image you might have, you think you might experience when you die, when you see your life just like in, flash forward, just like everything compressed into 2 minutes.
Right.
And I saw every single one of those experiences compressed in this very rapid moment in time. And each moment was utter perfection. I felt the perfection of each of those moments in a way that I did not experience them when I experienced them. I could see those scenes and knew when I experienced that as really painful, or I experienced that as really disappointing, or in this experience I was really angry. But when I experienced them in this moment, compressed, I really felt the utter perfection of every one of those moments. There's no real way to express that so that listeners can sort of say, well, of course, then I can look back at my life. But it's one of those experiences I like to relate because it's different from the sort of intellectual, let me tell you, everything's perfect just as it is. I experienced, and I honestly believe that everything that we are experiencing in our life is that perfection. And it's really our mind's constant ability to sort of look at it and regard it as not perfect that is what keeps us from experiencing our life as perfection. And that's really all we're here to do, is just see everything that unfolds in our life as perfection.
That's beautiful. And I hope that the people that were listening tonight and will be listening that weren't able to actually listen live, that they will, when they listen to this again or, after the fact, that they can hold on to a lot of these thoughts, because they really are very, very prominent. I have, by the way, I've posted in the chat room several times tonight, the link to Amazon for your book. So I would love for you to share with everybody, website information, book information, any other appearances. And obviously I'm going to be waiting for the other 2 books, and would love to invite you back on after your next book is published, or just before, or what have you. Love to have you back on.
Oh, well, thank you. I'd be delighted to come back. So,
Great.
I will, so my website, if people would like to learn a little bit more about me, is, www.patrickpaulgarlinger.com. I know it's a mouthful. For years I was sort of like, oh, why didn't I have a simple name? But what I've come to appreciate the advantage of that. While it's a mouthful, there's nobody else with that name. So, Patrick Paul Garlinger, you're not gonna end up on somebody else's website. And the book you can find on Amazon. It's probably the best place to look for it. And you can look under my name, but Seeds of Light, it will come up, pretty easily, we found. I'm also, I recently started a YouTube channel. So if people want to, search my name on YouTube, I'm now posting, videos and free content and whatnot there. And, so yeah, that's where you can find me.
Well, your website is really fantastic. So, I invite everyone, and I did post that in there. I actually don't know that you actually had sent that to me because I didn't have it. So I'm glad that I have it because I just also posted that into the chat room so people can have that and they can bookmark it and go back to it later as they need, and so they can just get that done. Really lovely. It's a lot of information there on your website, so that's good. So they can get all of that. So when is your next book supposed to be out, Patrick?
So I think it's going to be around February or March of next year. That's the plan right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
good.
you got to give each book its life. I didn't want to rush the other two out so quickly, even though they're there and kind of ready to be birthed into the world. But, we got to give,
just
gotta
hanging
give
out.
They're just hanging out. So early next year. Do their thing.
And that has to be hard with you doing interviews so that you don't get too much into the other material because you already have it available to you. So it's hard just to kind of keep a focus on this first one, but I have to say this was a really good book. I mean, again, it is an extremely powerful book. It's a thought-provoking book, and it's not rainbows and unicorns. It's certainly not, dark and depressing either. I don't want it to make people misunderstand that either because it's not. But it is not one of those books that you just can read and then just put down and you're done with it. You really have to, you go through it chapter by chapter and you absorb the information because it is a different conceptual way that they're looking at life itself for us humans. And it's interesting. It's their presentation.
Yeah, well, thank you. I actually have the same relationship to the book as you do because, I get the material, but I often find, and I hope people will read it because I found that their way of expressing things was, just made sense in a way that sometimes I myself struggle to kind of regurgitate and explain. And I feel like, if I tried to write this book the way I normally write, it would have been a mess. They know what they're doing. They know exactly how to lay this stuff out, and it's meant to be taken in kind of slowly. But I have to go back and reread myself. I don't remember half of it. So.
Well, and any information that I put out like that, I don't remember it. I have to go back. If I have notes, I have to go back because It's the same thing. So it's understandable because it's through you. It's not necessarily from you. I guess that's the way of saying it. They don't like the way I said that, but I'm not quite sure how else to say it. So.
No, you're absolutely right. One final anecdote. I actually wrote the book. The book has a preface where I laid out what the, sort of the origin of it. And, when I originally did the manuscript, my editor and designer came back and said, actually you did this as a foreword, but it's supposed to be a preface. And I changed it so that it was a preface and realized it's a foreword. It's not my work.
Well, bless your heart. Thank you so much, Patrick, for being here. And thank you all for listening tonight. I hope you enjoyed the show. Until we meet again, wherever your life's journey leads you, many blessings, everyone, and good night. Good night, JP and Tobias.